So now let's look at a scenario when we're dealing with multiple platforms. So let's look at a situation where we're dealing with iOS, which is using NetCLI, where we're using Junos, which is using NetConf, where we're using Arista, which is going to use eAPI, and where we're using NXOS, which is going to use NXAPI. So first of all, let's focus on Arista. So if I look at my inventory for Arista, you'll see I'm still specifying Ansible connection local. So we're still doing Ansible connection local. I've set my Ansible Network OS to be EOS. I have for all these platforms the username and password defined in this standard Ansible way. If I look at group vars, I now have this provider that I'm going to use, specifies the host, the username, and the password, specifies that I'm using eAPI. I'm going to use SSL. I'm not going to validate the cert because it's going to be a self-signed cert, and I'm specifying the timeout. Now, if I look at my playbook, you can see I'm doing EOS fax, and I'm using my provider. So pretty similar to what you should expect from what we've seen earlier with Ansible 2.4, Ansible 2.3, and using a provider. We'll just verify that this works successfully. So once again, we're doing explicit connection local here, and Arista fax worked successfully. Now, if we look at the same thing for NXOS, I'm specifying connection local. I have my Ansible Network OS equals NXOS. I have these two NXOS switches defined. If I look at group vars, I have a provider. It's using the user and password from inventory. It's using the Ansible host from inventory. I'm telling it to use NXAPI, use SSL. I'm not going to validate the certs. It's listening on port 8443, and there I specify a timeout. If I look at my playbook, I have explicitly set the provider. And let's see if that works correctly. So again, to verify our version, we're running Ansible 2.4. We'll do Ansible playbook, NXOS fax, Ansible host. See if this executes successfully. Okay, and it did come back and execute successfully. So now we could stitch this together. Look at our Ansible host for Cisco. We can see that we have network CLI for the connection. Arista, we can see we have local for the connection. Junos, we see we have NetConf for the connection. NXOS, we see we have this. So let me go ahead and make a playbook. I'm going to call this multiple platforms.yaml. I'm going to go ahead, whoops, not make dir. Okay, I'm going to cat Arista in there. I'm going to cat NXOS into there. I'm going to cat Junos into there. And then I'm going to cat. This is probably here. The Cisco iOS one into there as well. And then I'm going to clean it up a little bit. Okay, so one play. This is Arista using a provider. Second play is going to be NXOS using a provider. Third play is going to be Juniper using no provider, using NetConf, and having an inferred set of arguments from inventory. And this one will be Ansible 2.5, iOS, Cisco, And that's using iOS command doing show ARP, which should be fine. So now let's see if that works correctly. Multiple platforms YAML and Ansible host. So I've constructed 4 separate plays. Each one of the plays is using a different connection type. Arista is using connection local, and then inside its provider, it's going to be specifying using eAPI. NXOS is also using connection local, and inside its provider, it's specifying to use NX API. Junos is using the netconf connection type. Cisco IOS is using the network CLI connection type. So let's see if these all operate correctly. Here I'm using NXOS. That worked. Now I'm going to move on to Junos. Verify that this in fact works correctly. And then finally we'll get to Cisco IOS with network CLI and verify that that also works. Still waiting for Junos to complete. Junos completed. That worked correctly. There I see my iOS one worked. So we had basically 4 different platforms, 2 of them that use connection local, but they use 2 totally different transports to connect. One of them, the Junos one, that used the netconf connection type. The last one, Cisco IOS, which used the network CLI connection type. So we're mixing platforms in this single playbook.